changing structures is important to changing behavior. And so that a permaculture garden out there is a structure that allows us to explore ideas about how farming and gardening and how our relationship with Mother Nature might be. Without that structure, it's just a really good idea. The structures allow us to explore different ways of being. And so discovering structure is really important. Your homework is to pull out a news story. Some of you have done it already, and I'll give you some feedback. Thank you for that. Pull out a news story, just anything in the news, and to identify what structures are resulting in this behavior over and over again. Let's see. So we're going deeper in the iceberg. I want to show you a very brief clip, which is a review of how we use the iceberg and why we use the iceberg, suggesting that events are not accidents, but results, sometimes unintentional, but necessarily results of particular kinds of structures. Let's see if I can get this one working.
Human systems and the causes of their behavior. In this video, we'll look at the source of the problems in a human system, how you change the system behavior, and the question of who is responsible for the system behavior. Let's consider a problem of a large-scale human system. One of the principles of systems thinking is that what we call problems are actually a result of the system functioning perfectly as designed. In the United States, there's an epidemic of early onset of type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is a disease normally acquired in middle age and is caused by overconsumption of sugar. In the United States, children are now developing this serious disease. We would clearly consider this a problem. In the systems thinking language, the disease epidemic is a symptom of the system. At the left, we correlate this symptom with the tip of an iceberg to emphasize the fact that, like an iceberg, what is seen is only about 10% of the larger problem. And, like an iceberg, if we spent our energy on somehow eliminating the tip, the buoyancy forces acting on the volume of ice beneath the surface would recreate the tip. In the same way, if we could somehow cure the disease, we expect that children would continue to acquire the disease because of systemic forces. What are these forces? Beneath the surface, there are hidden patterns of behavior or trends that lead to the symptom. In the illustration of diabetes, there is an overabundance of sugar in the diet of children in the United States. Why are children eating so much sugar? Well, beneath the pattern of this consumption, there's a set of systemic structures that cause the pattern. Again, in our illustration, high consumption of sugar for children is a consequence of farming policies from the 1970s that results in billions of dollars of federal monies used to subsidize the growth of corn each year. This overproduction of corn has been converted to high fructose corn syrup, which is a concentrated sugar. In other words, sugar is a subsidized commodity. It is therefore used as an ingredient in many food products whose costs are now lower because of the subsidy. The bottom line is that foods containing sugar and sugar products are very low cost and have therefore become a larger fraction of our caloric intake. Now, how did these systemic structures get in place? Well, those who created the policies had a set of mental models that farm subsidies would be beneficial. They assumed that without government subsidies, farmers would no longer farm and the U.S. would not have a reliable source of food. So back to our systems principle, we can see that the problem of early onset of type 2 diabetes is actually the result of the system functioning perfectly as designed, beginning with the beliefs and assumptions of the designers. To be sure, it is an unintended consequence, but it is a direct consequence of the hidden mental models, the systemic structures that are created out of those mental models, and the patterns that arise because of the structure. To permanently fix the problem, we must intervene in the hidden parts of the system, with the higher leverage lying in the deepest part of the system, the mental models.
So our work in sustainable agriculture is to try to change systemic structures by creating things like permaculture gardens and earth foods and simple gifts and the Real Food Challenge, these kind of structures that actually begin to shift behavior. In the example of type 2 diabetes, there may be other structures that contribute to it. I'm sure there are. There are other kinds of behavior that develop the need and desire for cheap sugar. But that's one of them, that the American farm policy actually contributes to a system in which the pattern of behavior of overconsumption of cheap sugar products becomes the norm. In order to shift behavior, we've got to look at the structures and look at the mental models that contribute to those behaviors. And so that's what we're going to do over the next week or so, is how do we begin to understand what structures are contributing to behaviors and what mental models cause the structures to be part of the norm. Recycling is an example. Recycling is a pattern of behavior on this campus. We have won awards because our campus recycles at a higher percentage than most campuses in the country. Recycling is a pattern of behavior. Most everybody throws stuff in the right bin on their way out the door. You have to have structures to do this. You've got to have the recycling bins, the composting bins with the DCs and all that. They've all got to be there. Some of the systemic structures are physical things. And so in my homework, I asked you to try to identify physical things. I asked you to identify organizations, policies, and rituals that might contribute to a particular news story. Organizations, we've got to have UMass, the Waste Management Group, to make this happen. It's a structure, it's an organization that's part of UMass that makes recycling a common behavior. We're going to have policies. For example, if you pull up the web page, you see on the page, the front page of the Waste Management Group, you can see the policies around the kinds of things that can be recycled and where they can be recycled and why they can be recycled. We have policies that affect behavior. And of course, the ritual of simply being ritual is a habit that we do but without thinking, becomes part of our lives. And so the ritual, the habit of recycling becomes the norm at a place like UMass. Not everywhere. The dorms are particularly bad at recycling. I don't know what it is about the culture of the dormitory. Perhaps that you don't want to get caught with all the beer cans because you're not of age. But there are other things that intervene there. But their dorms generally don't do as well as the classrooms and the DCs and other places, the blue wall for recycling. But it has become a ritual. So my homework is to ask you to look for these things, these physical things, these organizations, these policies, and perhaps even rituals where they're simply habits that we don't think about any longer. And some of you had some really interesting rituals proposed in the homework that was due this week. Thank you for that.